The YouTube recording will be uploaded to the Harif website, and it'll be sent out in the next mail out to you. Right, well, this evening, the subject of our event is Shanghai Express, Baghdadi Jews in China. In the 19th century, Jews from Baghdad settled along the trade routes of the British Empire, Mumbai, Calcutta, Singapore, Hong Kong, and finally Shanghai. A small number of intrepid merchants turned the Shanghai trading post in China into a leading financial center. Here to tell their story is Maisie Meyer. Born in Calcutta, India, of Baghdadi Jewish parents, Dr. Meyer pioneered the research into the Baghdadi Jewish community of Shanghai. She is a double graduate in English and Humanities, both with honors, and obtained an MA degree in International History. She was awarded a PhD from the London School of Economics in 1994. Her publications, From the Rivers of Babylon to the Wangpu, A Century of Sephardi Jewish Life in Shanghai, and Shanghai's Baghdadi Jews, a compilation of biographical memories, have been widely acclaimed. So without further ado, over to you, Maisie. Thank you very much. Can't hear. Oh, no.
Katie, you're unmuted.
Okay, I'm pleased about that. And I'll get my screen going now.
Over to you.
Well, good evening. And first of all, can you all hear me? I hope so anyway.
We can.
It'll give me great pleasure to flout the COVID travel restrictions and take you on a journey of thousands of miles that spans 2 centuries to find out about Jews who left Baghdad in the mid-19th century and settled in China where the pandemic started. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Shanghai Express. Sit comfortably and fasten your seatbelts because we'll be traveling at tremendous speed, or you don't need to bother to wear your masks. Now let's start here. Baghdadi Jews were proud of their rich Babylonian heritage. They traced their roots as far back as 598 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, conquered the kingdom of Judah and transported Jewish captives from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is the Ben Ish Hai, Chacham, Yosef, Haim, and their rabbis were the supreme religious authorities within world Jewry, and you know that the Babylonian Talmud was compiled in the yeshivot of Sura and Pumbedita. These photos will give you a glimpse of the background of the community. Notice their dress was influenced by the fashions of the Ottoman Empire. There's you have the Dango family and the merchant and his wife. You notice the worry beads in his hand. Yeah, but I would have asked you if you could tell me what they were for, but we might discuss that later. And here we see him with a sword, but Baghdadi Jews were dhimmis, they were second-class citizens, and they were not allowed to carry swords, so he's only got that for the picture. The Sassoon family were the respected leaders of a flourishing Jewish community, but all this changed under the oppressive rule of Dawood Pasha in the 1820s. He persecuted his Jewish subjects and actually imprisoned David Sassoon and only released him after an enormous ransom had been paid. And the Sassoons fled from Baghdad and settled here in Bushehr, which is a trading post of the British East India Company on the Persian Gulf. When the East India Company's trading monopoly was abolished, opening India's door to private enterprise, the Sassoons decided to settle in India. This is David Sassoon, the founder of a vast commercial empire dealing in an unlimited range of merchandise. His garments and headdress add to his impressive appearance, and he never gave up wearing them. Perhaps his greatest asset was his family of 14 children, including 8 sons from 2 marriages, and they became his valuable agents. And this is Farha Sassoon, his second wife. She was only 11 years old at the time of their marriage. There was a difference of 35 years between the eldest and youngest of his children. The Sassoon firm especially employed Jews from Baghdad as clerks. Judeo-Arabic was the medium of communication, which is Hebrew written in Arabic script. For convenience, the term Baghdadi encompasses Jews from Syria and Arabic-speaking Jews from the Ottoman Empire, Aden, and Yemen, and also Jews from Persia and Afghanistan who did not speak Arabic. The Sassoon family laid the foundations to preserve the identity of Baghdadi Jews in India, and their generosity extended to the citizens of Bombay as well. It's impressive. After his death, they contributed towards a huge statue of him, which you can see here. And you see it actually today in the Sassoon Library in Bombay. In Bombay, the Baghdadis encountered the Bene Israel and the Cochin Jews. Unlike them, the Baghdadis seemed to be unaffected by the creed and culture of their Indian neighbors. And they had misgivings about the purity of the Bene Israel and discouraged marriage with them. Acculturation to the British and racial barriers. Okay, let me just show you, they also had Cochin Jews here, who they didn't distance themselves to such an extent from them. The acculturation to the British and racial barriers promoted by colonialism led the Baghdadis to distance themselves from the Bene Israel, as they felt association with them might lower their own social status. They were pragmatists and wished to identify with their British rulers in the hope of achieving political security and social privilege. After all, they had arrived in India, where the British were politically dominant, and all that was Western seemed worthy of emulation. This is David Sassoon with 3 of his sons. When I was at a conference in Vienna, I was asked if he was the butler. But in fact, this is Solomon David Sassoon, and that's his wife, Flora, and they were renowned she was renowned for her extensive knowledge of the Torah. They settled in England and lived like royalty. There she is. She does look very royal there. That's their crest. Well, at long last, we have arrived in Shanghai. The Treaty of Nanking brought to an end the infamous Opium Wars in 1842. Opened Shanghai and other treaty ports to trade. 10 square miles of land outside Shanghai were set aside for foreign residents, and in time these evolved into the international settlement, which combined the British and American settlements, the French concession, and the Chinese city. They were 3 separate administrative units, each with their own government, laws, and officials. David Sassoon sent his second son, Elias, to establish a branch of the firm in Shanghai when he was not quite 25 years old. This was in 1845. Elias initially traded in general merchandise, and he purchased land at incredibly low price. prices, which was a very wise move, as later it was to spiral astronomically. Baghdadi Jewish merchants left their families for lengthy periods to take advantage of the lucrative China trade. Undeterred by the arduous journey of 70 days in wretched old tram steamers, the journeys were a catalogue of disasters, including being grounded for days, cargo being thrown overboard, sitting through the nights with guns at the ready in case of pirates. And in the 1870s, Shanghai wasn't such a great place to be living in. It was overcrowded, and there were frequent outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and exceptionally high death rate. Their religious traditions, kinship, endogamy, similar commercial interest, and when I say endogamy, as we know, Baghdadis only married Baghdadis, and of course their distinctive cuisine, this all bonded them together. And in this way, they forged a common identity with other Baghdadi Jews who had settled in trading posts as far-flung, and you'll see them on the map, as Bombay, Calcutta, Pune, Cochin, Singapore, Rangoon, Hong Kong, Java, Kobe, Nagasaki, and Yokohama. And there was constant toing and froing between them. To give you an idea of how close this interaction was, the Mohel was named China Clipper because he was called upon very frequently to perform circumcisions in Kobe. Here we see a picture of the wife with his wife and his family. Well, after serving what I would call an apprenticeship in the Sassoon firm, Baghdadi gently branched out of their own and dealt in tea, silk, cotton, and wait for it, opium. Incredible as it may seem, the trade in opium was legal between 1858 and 1917. One could buy opium in auctions conducted by the government, and large revenues from taxes made it very profitable for the British to support this trade. Clearly, economic values outweighed moral principles. Former Baghdadi Jews who lived in Shanghai are still sensitive about their ancestors' involvement in the trade. They point out that the money that they made from opium was plowed back into China's economy. Indeed, opium merchants were very prominent members of the foreign community, and several received awards from the Chinese government. However, this argument cut little ice at a conference, which was in Melbourne. I was heckled by a Chinese gentleman who went ballistic with rage at the Opium War's ruthless exploitation of his country, and he was perfectly justified. Today, it beggars belief that statesmen like Palmerston launched these wars because of what they considered was intolerable restrictions on their freedom to trade. Well, I suppose they should be judged according to the standards of justice applicable at the time of the slave trade, colonization, etc. But thank goodness we don't have time to go into that morass. As we know, sadly, oppression and subjugation are old themes in world history. Well, on a lighter note, Baghdadi Jews were one of numerous minorities in Shanghai. The common commercial interest and the fact that they could communicate in English was crucial in identifying them with the British, who had power in the international settlement. And they were certainly comfortable about belonging to the ruling class, although foreign devils were never welcome by the populace. And this was made abundantly clear during the Boxer Uprising in 1900, and also even more so with the awakening of intense Chinese patriotism in the 1920s. Life in the treaty port had all the trappings of colonialism, and great efforts were made to preserve white superiority. A rigid sense of a set of rules demarcated social boundaries. Now, in this context, I'd like to draw your attention to the heroic efforts of Baghdadis to rescue the remnants of the Kaifeng Jewish community, which numbered at about 1,500 at its peak. And they came to China via the Silk Route in about the 12th century. That's the Silk Route over there. And they became assimilated and lost to Judaism because of a lack of Jewish leaders and teachers and isolation, and most of all, intermarriage. As you can see, they have become indistinguishable from the surrounding population. Here we see a family. These are Jews. And there as well. Oh, just notice that they all have notice their feet over there. It's hard to believe that they had, even the child had bound feet. Hard to believe that they're Jewish women. In 1898, the Shanghai community received a letter informing them that Catholic priests had purchased a Kaifeng tourist scroll, and the thought of their sacred scroll in the hands of priests galvanized them into taking action to rescue the remnants of the Kaifeng Jews, who now were reduced to only 8 families. They wrote impassioned letters and signed by these members of the community. Now, this is a very important historical document because it gives you the names of absolutely all of them who were there. And in this letter, they very generously offered to collect money to rebuild a synagogue, send teachers to instruct them, and to assist them to come to Shanghai to be taught a trade. And here we said, in fact, 8 Kaifeng Jews came to Shanghai. They attended synagogue, and they were taught Hebrew and English in the Jewish school, and they visited Jewish homes. Now, I just want you to bear in mind that foreigners regarded Chinese as socially inferior. So they risked compromising their own social status in this class-ridden society. And you notice it's a very sharp contrast to their attitude to the Bnei Israel in Bombay. And I have another presentation where I can go into that, but it's a very interesting topic to find out why on earth it was so different here. Okay, now, but with the passage of time, the article in the Israel's Messenger, which was the journal of the Baghdadi Jews in Shanghai, observed, this was in 1924, it practically means making converts of a strange people, for they are Jews no longer, they are Chinese, absorbed, assimilated, and rendered indistinguishable. The sadness of it makes me weep, and I must admit that it brought tears to my eyes when I trawled through the documents. In contrast to Kaifeng Jews, intermarriage was uncommon with the Baghdadis, given that they were strictly monogamous. So it was a quantum leap when Silas Aaron Hardoon intermarried. He was born in 1851, and he emigrated with his father to Bombay when he was 5 years old. He had no formal education, but his exceptional business acumen enabled him to work his way up from a lowly go-down keeper to become a manager of the Sassoon firm, and he then set on his own, investing in rental properties with huge success. He lived in a pagoda-roofed house with his Eurasian Buddhist wife, Eliza Ruth Hardoon. Her mother was a Chinese seamstress and a father a French sailor. Their 40-acre garden housed a Buddhist monastery and temple with accommodation for nuns and monks and a vast retinue of servants with their relatives. Intriguingly, Hardoon combined extravagance with severe austerity. He sat his office was not heated and there was no rug. And on cold days, he sat with his bundled up in his overcoat with fingerless gloves. He was very interested in preserving Chinese cultural heritage. and he had the Chinese a translation of a Quran, and he promoted Chinese techniques. He regarded China as his home and wished to use the wealth that he'd made in China for the benefit of the Chinese people. And for his philanthropy, he received 12 awards, including the highest that the Chinese government had ever given to a foreigner. And here you see, these are his medals, and a very high honor that he was given, and he proudly displays them here with his wife, Lisa. The Chinese government invited him to Beijing, to Peking, it's Beijing now, where he had an armed escort, and he actually dined with Pui, the boy emperor. Now this is the stuff of fairy tales. Hardun maintained links with the Jewish community. Here we see he's giving a reception for the Zionist emissary, and he hosts a rumor has it that Hardun had a dream in which his father appeared to him and reprimanded him for not doing enough for his own community. So he woke up and he donated this, the iconic Beth Aaron Synagogue, which cost about £300,000 at the time, and that's 3 million today. He never would have imagined that in little over a decade, 250 students of the Mir Yeshiva would be housed here. And legend had it that it has an exact number of seats as there were students. And the rabbis and students reputedly studied here for 18 hours a day. The Harduns had no children of their own, but they adopted 6 girls and 5 boys of various nationalities, not Chinese. They were brought up as Jews, and a Jewish Hebrew teacher was employed to. Now this is that we've seen a picture before. He became their Hebrew teacher, and they provided a Rolls Royce to transport them to their lessons. Here we have, now, let me rather go back then, say, the surviving Hardun children have kept very close contact. Maple, who's the one here sitting in front with this lovely hat on, has written her biography in my book, and it's about the bizarre household in which she was brought up in, and she lets all the skeletons out of the family cupboard, and this is my only chance of making the book a bestseller. Leo Hardun, who's standing here in the middle, gave me this picture. We got very friendly, and sadly he passed away a few years ago. Now, Hardun died reciting the Shema. He was 84 years old, and this was in 1931. His funeral caused a furore within the community, and you will understand why. Does this look like a Jewish funeral? These pictures give you a glimpse of the 2,000 mourners, and it was a mishmash. You had Taoist, Buddhist, Jewish officials, each performing their own rites, while the cantor eulogized the Hardun, and I should say the Hazan, he eulogized Hardun, and the sons read Kaddish while kowtowing to their father's body. It was more Chinese than Jewish in character. There about 100 joss sticks were deposited around the grave. Well, some Baghdadis went ballistic when they discovered that Hardun had left his entire fortune, a staggering $115 million, to Lisa, his wife. From Baghdad to Basra, Jerusalem, Bombay, and Shanghai, wires were kept hot with the claims of obscure relatives. I met in New York the claimant Salah Hardun. He came to Shanghai when he was 16 years old to contest the will. he vividly remembered the sensational legal battle for the Hardoon estate, which took place in the British Supreme Court for China. I show you some headlines. It really was big news at the time, not only in China, but even in England, they knew about this. The case hinged around the question of citizenship. If the court decided Hardoon was British, his wife inherited the entire fortune. If it decided he was Iraqi, she was entitled to only 1/4 of the estate, and the rest had to be equally divided among the next of kin. Now, there was a howl of outrage when the British judge decided in favor of Lisa, and many furiously protested. The British Treasury garnered £500,000 from the debt duties of an Iraqi. This was their story, and they were sticking to it. Hardoon Road was the first paved road in the foreign concession, and several people have roads named after them. But do you know anyone who has a Monopoly set named after him? Now let's see what else we can discover about Baghdadis in this fascinating city. Baghdadi merchants diversified their business interests, invested in land, property, public utilities, and influenced finance, and dominated the stock exchange. In the 1930s, I'm quoting this, in the 1930s, where there were no more than 700 Baghdadis in the city, the president and more than 1/3 of the 99 members of the Shanghai Stock Exchange were Baghdadis. And they discussed tactics in Judo-Arabic very effectively, I believe. And Baghdadis had a high profile in real estate markets. Marcella Rubin, an American visitor to Shanghai in 1925, recorded that half the business and residential areas were in the hands of Baghdadis who'd made and she noted that they had practically all that in their own hands and were very wealthy. Although only 1,000, they numbered only 1,000, they made a considerable contribution to the development of Shanghai, and they constructed some of the landmark buildings that you see on the front, which fashioned Shanghai to the 5th largest city in the world. This was in 1932. Sassoon, Ezra, Hardoon, Benjamin, and Somek buildings located in the heart of the city, to say nothing of their palatial homes, today are monuments to a once vibrant community, particularly as their cemeteries no longer exist. The Israel Messenger called Shanghai the Tel Aviv of the Orient, and it had many other labels like Paris of the East, Paradise of Adventurers, and the most wicked city in the world. A clergyman once famously said, God owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology if he doesn't destroy Shanghai. Some like Ezra, Sassoon, Kaduri, Hardoon, Shahmoon, Benjamin, Josephs, Toegs were fabulously wealthy. Unfortunately, most documents and headlines focus on the wealthy members of the community. It's important to remember that the majority were middle class and many poor. Now, this is Edward Ezra, who had a high profile within the foreign and Jewish community. When I saw this photograph in Cecil's album in Hong Kong, I intended to use it as a cover for my book. But it was pointed out to me that it seems to have nothing whatsoever to do with Shanghai. It could be a photo of the British gentry in England, couldn't it? You see, they lived in the lap of luxury, that's their home, and threatening guards prevented me from taking photographs of it because it now houses the People's Armed Police. Now, while I whizzed through these, bear in mind, this is Shanghai in the 1920s. A swimming pool, tennis courts, electrically operated gym, a ballroom, which accommodated 150 dancers, extravagant fancy dress parties, furniture, which Louis XV, and here we have Marble Hall, which is the residence of the Kaduri family. Sadly, Laura Kaduri, the mother, lost her life. Their home was burnt down, and Laura lost her life in the flames. This is Sir Eddie to his sons, Horace and Lawrence. I'll tell you more about them later. There's the Bund again, and there we have the iconic Cathay Hotel. I'm pointing to it there. It was completed in 1929, and it was the pride of Sir Victor Sassoon, who was the grandson of Elias. He had sensational fancy dress parties he had. They were recorded in the press. And Sir Victor owned Shanghai real estate valued at 9 million sterling, and that was thanks to his grandfather, Elias. He was renowned in horse racing circles and bred horses. And if I tell you that he won the British Epsom Derby 4 times, you will understand why he said, the only race greater than the Jewish race is the Derby. Oh, he loved the company of beautiful women and asked why he never married. So Victor replied, I promised at least 50 women that I wouldn't, and I can't bring myself to disappoint that many. Well, he finally plucked up his courage, and wait for it, he was 78 years old. He shook the world with surprise when he married a 39-year-old Texan who's his nurse, Maud Evelyn Barnes, on the 1st of April in 1959. It's not a coincidence that it was on All Fools' Day. There's him with Barnesy. He jokingly explained, 77 years of being a bachelor is essential to acquire enough judgment to choose the right wife. Oh, and he boasted that he understood women because half my ancestors were women after all. My best presentations of Sir Victor, he's such an amazing personality. Anyway, this was his Tudor villa, here we go. And it houses a zoo and also a large hotel in its estate. In the words of Israel Cohen, a Zionist visitor to Shanghai in the 1920s, these buildings and the lifestyle they depict suggest that a great deal of energy was spent in amassing wealth and in the pursuit of pleasure. But to my surprise, I discovered a veritable stronghold of uncompromising Orthodox Judaism. And this was because the elders of the community were proud of their Babylonian heritage and were determined to preserve their unique identity. And the wealthy benefactors provided institutions to preserve the infrastructure and traditions. This is the Ohel Rachel Synagogue, which was donated by Sir Jacob Sassoon. Actually, it has been very recently renovated as the Aron Kodesh, and there's pictures there. It had at one time 30 Torah scrolls. Now, as you know, this is the Beth Aaron Synagogue, but sadly, this impressive building was demolished in 1985 to make an office blocks were put up in its place because of its valuable site. This is Nissim Ezra Benjamin, the editor of Israel's Messenger, and a picture of his father and his wife. It's on the left here. This Israel's Messenger, as you see here, was a Jewish paper devoted to the interests of Jews and Judaism in the Far East, Zionism. And then we have the souvenir number here. School children of the Shanghai Jewish School, which began as a Talmud Torah, where the boys were taught Hebrew through the medium of Arabic, and it blossomed into a full-blown co-educational institution where secular subjects were taught for the overseas Cambridge examination as a school certificate. The Jewish Communal Association was established in 1909, and then we have a birth certificate. It recorded births, marriages, deaths, and provided kosher food and saw to the distribution of charity. Now, this solid infrastructure enabled the community to maintain its identity. That's a ketubah, an extracts in Aramaic. It says in here in the town of Shanghai, the river Huangpu in the Republic of China. Here's the Toei wedding. It was a very close-knit community. Social life centered around their homes and religious ceremonies, annual balls, fun fairs, wedding and engagement parties kept the community together. And that was Isaac Abraham's family. The wedding, which took place in D.H. Abraham's garden. Religious ceremonies. Here we see that's his father, some other. That's keeping very close-knit community. And they knew how to have fun. And there's their band, the Caliph Jazz Band, was organized by Ezekiel Abraham. Just for fun, compare it to the bands in Baghdad. Here they played popular Western songs at parties and communal events. And the youth were up to date with the latest dance steps. Right? That's the band again. The wedding reception. Now, this is David Ezekiel Joshua Abraham and his wife Moselle, the respected president of the community, and their home was the nucleus of the community. Large garden parties, notably the Gaduris, were given over for school picnics, sports days, and by all accounts, the tract of land behind the Abraham's home was a venue for Sabbath afternoon football. And it used to be the Jacobs versus the rest, because it was a very large family. The Jacobs had a large family, and they fielded a formidable football team. Apparently, they only lost when it rained because they wore spectacles. That's the Abraham family on their doorstep. And here's the Jacob families without their spectacles on. Anyway, isn't it difficult to distinguish them from the British gentry? And yet, this was the most devoutly observant family in Shanghai. I wouldn't say that, it was one of the most. And that's comparing again to Baghdad, which I like doing sometimes. And there's a middle-class family, the Halali family. And it's 3 generations of Silah Jacob's family. Joe, the little boy, he went settled in Israel, and he became a diplomat, a journalist, and radio broadcaster, one of the most interesting people I have interviewed. Now, Baghdadi Jews, as we know, were extremely fond of gambling, particularly card games, mahjong, and they never lost their passion for Taoli, on which they were nurtured. As a community, they identified with the British. British interests were their interests. Many were British subjects because they were born in Bombay, or they had resided under the British Raj for a long time, or they worked in British firms. That made them British subjects. And a British passport was a passport to privilege, and much sought after. Baghdadi Jews were ardently patriotic, and the wealthy emulated the British gentry. They joined European clubs, and they were prominent at the racecourse, which is the hallmark of the British colonial system. You see them riding ponies. I got the picture from his son, and here here we see them on the hunting club. These photos make it difficult to believe that clubs and sports are not really part of Baghdadi culture. But in Shanghai, they developed the British passion for competitive games. The Ezra and Tariq family, in their elegant gear, made a high profile at the Hunt Club, and the family was there to support them. There we go. And this is one of their favorite leisure activities, boat trips on the Wangpu. As demonstrated in their treatment of the Kaifang descendants, Baghdadis also felt solidarity with other Jews, but believed it was important to preserve their own Baghdadi identity and emphasize the difference between the Sephardim and Ashkenazi. In Shanghai, they had their first encounter with an Ashkenazi community comprised of Russians escaping Tsarist persecution and arriving in about 1895. By the 1930s, their numbers had soared to 7,000 to 8,000. Initially, the Baghdadis had a fund for their relief, and they made their prayer halls available to them, but they had separate services because of the difference in liturgy. In fact, their entirely different social, economic, political backgrounds caused tensions between the two communities. And here we see for the Russian Jews were involved in import-export markets, dealing mainly in fur, grain, bristle, and wool. And also, they developed their own communal associations, and they employed a rabbi, a Lubavitch rabbi. In 1920s, he was employed. A Rabbi Meir Ashkenazi, he's on the right. He was very much respected by the Baghdadis. The Russians were ardent Zionists, and Baghdadis frowned upon marriage with them. But in time, these barriers crumbled, and common meeting grounds were found in the Shanghai Jewish School and in the Boy Scouts and Girl Scout Guides. And I have a hard time convincing the younger generation that these barriers ever existed. Baghdadi Jews felt an exceptionally strong sense of solidarity to victims of Nazi persecution, who began trickling into Shanghai with the rise of Hitler. And by the end of 1939, the 10 square miles of the international settlement became a refuge for more than 20,000 victims, because it was an open port and documents and visas were not required. This, I think, was the only attraction. It was certainly not their first choice. This influx must be seen in the context of the Sino-Japanese War, which began in 1937. The Japanese bombed the Chinese city, and thousands of homeless Chinese poured into the foreign concession, swelling its population from 1.5 to 4 million. From the time the Jewish refugees set foot in Shanghai, they were maintained solely by Jewish relief organizations. Jewish families responded generously with gifts of food, clothing, furniture, invitations on a regular basis, led to lasting friendships. The majority were white-collar workers, professionals, businessmen, skilled artisans. But in a war-torn city, the struggle to earn a living became overwhelming, and refugees were perceived as a threat because of the competition for the few jobs that were available. The warm welcome extended to first arrivals cooled as their numbers soared. This was a used clothes market where the impoverished refugees peddled possessions to eke out a living. Rent was astronomical, so most of them were forced to live in the high. Dormitory housed up to 200 in a room. This cartoon shows their irrepressible sense of humor in these difficult circumstances. So Victor Sassoon magnanimously provided accommodation for 2,500 refugees at a time when no accommodation was available in this refugee swollen city. His revolving fund loaned money to the refugees to set up their own businesses, and in time from the ruins emerged nightclubs, restaurants, open-air cafes, bars. They organized concerts, theaters, art exhibitions, and there was a proliferation of newspapers. The Mir Yeshiva boys, these are some of them, were housed in the Bet Aaron Synagogue, as we saw earlier. And by a strange coincidence, in an elevator in Miami, I met the only Baghdadi girl to marry a Mir Yeshiva boy. These are her parents, and that's a picture of them. His name was Hendeles, Lazar Hendeles. And as a result of that, I got these most amazing pictures. These are the Mir Yeshiva boys and the Rabbi Ashkenazi walking, and well, it's a very, when I showed this at one of my presentations, there was somebody in the audience who recognized a few of the boys. It was quite an exciting time for us. Yeah. Wealthy Baghdadis were at the helm of the relief work, and Horace, that's the rabbis there, and Horace Kaduri was a driving force behind the Kaduri School, which educated some 1,000 pupils that had a high academic standard. And I've met several former pupils who are now successful businessmen and professionals. Horace organized an 18-day summer camp, in his words, to give the children an opportunity to have a little happiness, plenty of nourishment and fresh air, and thus build up their health. Though he remained a bachelor, he's a father figure to the youngsters in Shanghai, and a grateful community planted a forest in Israel, and in 1997, this monument dedicated to the benefactor of Shanghai Jewry, as you can see today, from a grateful community. Baghdadi Jews had an eventful history. Their lives were risked during the Sino-Japanese hostilities. During World War II, they enjoyed tremendous hardship and in July 1942, the German Gestapo chief, Josef Meisinger, the butcher of Warsaw, arrived in Shanghai. But the Japanese were not willing to engage in a final solution for their ally. They did, however, set up what they called a designated area for stateless people, which housed some 17,000 refugees from Nazi persecution. It was, in fact, the first ghetto in Asia. But the Japanese pointed out correctly that this order makes no mention of Jewish refugees, and all other foreigners are treated according to nationality. This is true. British subjects were interned in civilian assembly centers, so Iraqi nationals who were not interned, but were required to wear armbands. Their movements were restricted, and there was severe shortage of food. With their assets frozen, several became destitute and reduced to selling their possessions. After the communist takeover of Shanghai in 1949, all foreigners were classified as foreign entrepreneurs and despised imperialist parasites. Property owners were condemned as exploiting capitalists. The Chinese populace became robustly anti-foreigners. Baghdadi Jews were pressured to leave Shanghai. Ironically, these Baghdadis who had acted host to a huge number of refugees left Shanghai as refugees themselves in search of homes in Israel, Hong Kong, Australia, England, the USA, and Canada. I find it impossible not to be moved by the demise of this once vibrant community. Happily, I can end on a brighter note. There is now a resurgence of Jews in China, an estimated 10,000, and there are 13 thriving Chabad centers. And this one is in Shanghai, which incorporates a synagogue, a school, and a restaurant. But this center, which typically hosts between 50 and 100 guests on Shabbat, unfortunately, in the time of the pandemic, there are just barely 10. Well, thank you very much for staying the course on this long journey on the Shanghai Express. It's been a pleasure traveling with such good companions. And yes, you may unbuckle your seatbelts now. I'd be very pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much, Maisie. It's been a fabulous journey. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
So pleased.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if we have any questions, but we have quite a few people who know or are related to the Hardoon family. So perhaps we can ask one or two of them to share their comments with us.
I would absolutely love that. That's the best part, actually. We get to know much more about it.
Yeah. Toby, you're on.
Okay. Ted will speak to you. Well, actually, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband's uncle was Leo Hardoon. And we spent a lot of time with him and his children. He was a most charming man.
In Montreal, did you spend? It was in
Toronto.
Toronto, yes.
Because he married someone from Toronto. He met her in Israel.
That's right.
Stephen's mother's sister, Remy Hardoon, and they lived in Toronto. So we spent a lot of time with him eating Chinese food and he was talking about his past. And then the only other thing is that my mother was born in China. She was born in Harbin in 1922. My grandmother was from Siberia, and my grandfather was an Austrian. He was a prisoner of war and met her at a wedding because he played the violin. And then they lived in China for 4 years until he immigrated to the United States, where his brothers were. And then he sent for my grandmother and my mother. And they came through Yokohama and to Seattle, and then across the United States.
Wow, Toby, you've got to write this down. You've got a biography there for sure. That's very interesting. But I like Leo very much. We were in constant contact with each other, and he was always very supportive, and he really was what I call a nice guy. Was he actually wounded in the Israeli army?
Yes, he was.
Yes, I remember him saying so.
So you will remember that he looked like a little old Jewish man when we met him, but he spoke with a Cantonese or a Chinese accent, and it was very discreet. And of course, he was in touch with his Oriental siblings. I mean, very interesting.
I'm going to pass this talk on to my brother-in-law, Stephen, who will pass it on to his children. He has two children live in Toronto, and the son lives in the States.
I'd be delighted if you do that. I really would. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful, wonderful talk.
Thank you very much.
I have to confess that I've known Toby for almost all my life, and she was married to my cousin, and you never ever revealed the fact that your mother was born in China and that you had a Hardoon relative.
So Toby, you've got to write about it so everyone, all your friends and your family will know about it. It's important. It's very important.
That is very true, very true. Okay, so next we have Ellen, who actually comes from an Ashkenazi family who lived in Shanghai. Is that correct, Ellen?
Well, I was born in 1947, and I was 18 months old when we left. So I don't really have a memory of that. Everything that I know is what I've got from my parents, from my aunts and uncles. There were 16 members of my family who fled Germany in March 1939. And my parents, my aunt, my uncle, they saved everything. I have documents, papers, you name it. And that's how I know the whole history. And I do go and I do speak to different groups here. I'm in New Rochelle, New York. And I speak to different synagogues and groups of young students. And so I am very familiar with all of it. But I don't have any personal memory.
No, but I'm so pleased that you're involved in talking about it, because you have very valuable documents and stuff, which
Yes, absolutely.
It's very important. Thank
Yes.
you, Ellen.
Thank you.
for that, Ellen. Yes, and Gilda? Was that?
No,
No.
Gilda didn't come
Yeah,
darling.
if Gilda will unmute herself, then you can actually ask your questions.
Yvonne is next,
While
then
we're
Harold.
waiting,
I haven't
Yvonne, did you want to say something?
Yvonne is next, then
Yeah.
Harold.
Oh yeah. Oh, Harold, we've got Harold.
Hi. Hi.
Go ahead, Harold.
A few things. Number one, I know I've spent a lot of time in Shanghai actually lecturing, and also been to the synagogue galore and the area where, look, there were Jewish guides all about the Chaduris, the Harduns, everything. But I have two questions, please. And it's number one, I had relatives who were in the Shanghai ghetto, and I have a directory of the people who lived in the Shanghai ghetto before the Nazis took over. It was 37, 39, something like that. If anybody has relatives that are looking for a particular name, I'm happy to Xerox the page and send it on. Now, the other thing is, this is, you never know where people end up. There was a rabbi from Brisk, actually Brisk Baranovich, whose name was Neumann, and in the picture that I think Maisie had in her presentation, there was a picture of Ashkenazi rabbis during World War II. Please, if it's possible, I'd love to have one, because what is really strange, because one of the rabbis is this Rabbi Neumann, and the world is strange. His great his great granddaughter is married to the son of the American ambassador in Israel. It's a small world.
It sure is.
I mean, I know all these families. That's why it's amazing. Anyway, the name that I was looking for, and I actually wrote in someone who lived on the same street in the Jewish area. And I've been in the house where my relatives lived in Shanghai, and it's amazing. But Shanghai was a nothing place before the Baghdadi Jews arrived. They are the ones who started it. It's a city today of something like 25 million people. It's the Jews who started. It was a fishing village beforehand. And without the Baghdadi Jews and the Brits, God knows, it may still have remained that way today.
I totally agree, Harold. I'd be very pleased to send you the picture if you tell me where to send it. Find out. I'm sure Lynn will put us in.
Yeah, I'll put you in touch. No
Thank
problem.
you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, we've got Yvonne Torpik, who's been waiting very patiently.
Oh, Ellen, I see your book. Great.
Right, Yvonne, are you there? Would you like to speak? Yvonne Taufik.
Oh, I'm here, but I don't see myself.
We can see you. We can see
Oh,
you.
you can see me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, my mother lived in Shanghai, and her father was taken away by the Japanese and put in prison and died there. My father was from Austria and came to the United States during the war, and Harvard sent him to Chinese to study Chinese, and he ended up in Shanghai, and they got married there. And in 2003, we went to Shanghai, and I saw where they live, where the memorial was, but it was a very fascinating history to unveil when we were there. And the life, my mother got went to Shanghai after spending a year in Russia. She was 9 years old. Then she went to Japan, lived there for a year, and finally she got the papers to move to Shanghai. And it was their passport to freedom. So the stories I heard all my life were fascinating stories, and books have been written about it, and there's an interesting diary written by a woman. I don't remember her name, but going there brought it all to life for me.
I'm just very surprised that you say your father, if I heard you correctly, your father was actually imprisoned by the Japanese. That's very unusual. When he was in Shanghai, he was taken and imprisoned by the Japanese. Is that correct?
Yvonne?
Yeah. Oh,
She's gone.
hi. Oh, she's gone. She's gone.
Can we have
Is that Gilda?
Gilda.
Gilda, you're on. You're
Yvonne,
on.
Yvonne is my sister-in-law.
Oh, okay. Keep it in the
Okay.
family.
Yeah. And it's funny because there was a book about a history of Shanghai. And on the cover was a picture of the school kids. Yvonne's mother's picture was on the cover. And Saleh Hardoun, who is my grandfather's uncle, had a big page dedicated to him, of course. So we were connected from before we were born through Shanghai. But I had some questions from Maisie.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, all I heard from my family about Saleh Hardoun was he was very rich. He died in 1932, it seems like 1931, with 250 million pounds sterling. This is all I heard. Then I used to work with professors in UCLA and, you know, in the Sino department. And when I said I'm a Hardoun, a few professors gave me a lot of information. And then I ran into Condoleezza Rice's Sino advisor in a restaurant, and I talked to everybody. So I talked to him, and he gave me more information. And Maisie, you seem to know a lot more than my family does. They all said the fact
Jews
What?
who lived there, and I
What?
remember the Baghdadi Jews supported us.
Yes. I'm sorry, can we see it closer?
Sorry, do you have a camera, Carol?
Gilda, I give a presentation on Silas Hardoun. The whole presentation is on him. So I've got really a lot of information on that.
Yes, but what I wanted to add is nobody was very impressed with the amount of money he had, but with the, I'm sorry, are we talking at the same time? What's happening?
Sorry, Carol, can you let Gilda finish?
It's Gilda, then Carol, then Alan,
Yeah, go ahead, Gilda.
and then Harold again.
Go ahead.
Okay. It seems like they were all very taken by his generosity, his service to the community, and that
what comes up and press it.
Can you stick around?
No.
Carol, please mute yourself until Gilda's finished. Sorry. Gilda, can we have you back?
Yes.
There you go.
So I heard from others that he was the emperor's like very, very trusted person. Maisie, is that true? And how did he get so close to the emperor, if it's true?
I think that's an exaggeration. I know that he did mix with a lot of the politicians and stuff. I don't know how much influence he would have. And as far as I know, there was just that one visit to the boy emperor when he was invited to Peking. But I think that is exaggerated, but he was very influential. But I still think that the Chinese kept him at a distance because he was a foreigner. You know, they're not going to let him mix in politics, but they were very happy to get philanthropy and all the stuff he gave them.
And then another question. This is my son went with his father 15 years ago. And I said, look for the Hardoun Gardens. And the guide, he showed him what the Hardoun Gardens has become. It became the trade towers or the commercial center.
They had a huge building put up there. Yes, you're right.
And
where
one
the
more
mausoleum went.
Yes. And apparently they copied everything and put it a bit outside of town because Shanghai property is very expensive to have such, you know. And I don't know if you know Abe Sofer of the Hoover Institute in Stanford.
No, I
He
don't
was
think it.
he was Baker, James Baker's advisor, and he's an Iraqi. He told me that we cannot get anything of the tremendous amount of things that he left, but that if I get enough Hardoon signatures, I told him in 25 minutes I'll get you 25 signatures, that we could possibly get what has either was or has become a synagogue. Is that still there, the synagogue?
The synagogue, no, it's a block of apartments now. The Bet Haron.
All right.
Wait, is it government building?
Gilda, sorry to interrupt. I think there are other people who want to ask questions. Just to say, Alan Fahy has the most tremendous genealogy site, Les Fleurs de l'Orient, which has the genealogy of all these families.
Alan wants to speak the one after next. Okay. So
Okay.
Carol, then Alan.
Yeah, Carol, you're on. Carol, you want to ask a question? Make a comment? I think Carol.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
My name is actually Wick. Carol is my wife.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was one of the Jews of Shanghai, and I came to Shanghai from Vienna, my family, in 1939. And can you hear me?
I can hear you very clearly.
And I met you, Maisie Meyer, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and you live in Hendon. And I've heard your talks before, and I'm very fond of the Baghdadis because we came penniless from Vienna in 1939, and we were supported in what was known as the Heime in Ward Road Heim, Shuzan Road in Hongqiu in Shanghai. And we came with nothing, no money, Gunish, and we were supported with food and homes to live in, and the Baghdadis kept us going. That's what I remember from the Baghdadis. And this is a school report. I don't know if you can see this, of the Kaduri school that I went to in Shanghai. And I lived there till 1948. And then I came to London. And last year, I went back to the Ohel Moshe synagogue in Shanghai, and I went round the museum, and I showed them my name on the wall. And I said to them, I notice you have got not many books, you've got no library. So I donated them last year, 8,000 books to form a library, a Jewish library, about the Jews in the Holocaust and Jewish history of the world. And that was opened about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the pandemic, and it was in the papers and on television in Shanghai about this donation. And unfortunately, I couldn't go there, but I hope once the pandemic is over, maybe next year, please God, I'll go there. I couldn't be there for the opening.
I hope that you do go there, and I think you did a wonderful thing. But on the 20th of October in Austria, they've opened in Vienna. They've opened a library about the refugees who settled in Shanghai.
Alan Fahy.
Yeah. Okay. That's wonderful. Alan.
Thank you.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Yeah. Hi. Nice to see you. Well, I can't.
Nice to see you all, and I recognize so many faces. I just want to, I do have the genealogy of many of these Iraqi families on fahi.org, Les Fleurs de l'Orient. But what's most important, by the way, I do know of you, Maisie, and I think we corresponded before.
Yeah,
but the most interesting thing was that the late Helen Bechor, née Ruben, who had lived in Shanghai after the war, before the Chinese takeover, had given me a map and a direction on how to go and look for her house and the Tuek family and all these other names. And in 2000, I walked the street of Shanghai with this map, which of course nobody will recognize because all the names have changed. But I did manage to see the Tuek house. My wife is a Tuek. And also looked at all the various Jewish streets. But the most important is that at that time, the synagogue was closed. It was not open. But if you signed up with an organization called the Jews of Shanghai, a student will come in and take you there. And we did visit it because it was renovated for the visit of Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Back then. We also were allowed to visit the other synagogue, the one in Hongqiu, where there was a caretaker who took us to his home, which was donated by the owner before 49 when he left. There were 3 generations living in a very small place. And the kitchen was outdoors, almost outdoors. It was in the but the most important thing is that later, the synagogue, the Rachel synagogue, was renovated because a Moroccan Jew was there and he wanted to have a wedding. So he managed to get the government official to allow him to renovate the synagogue. And apparently it was a beautiful wedding. I didn't attend. And I heard, I don't know if it's still functioning or not, but the synagogue is really, really beautiful today.
Yeah, because somebody called Seth Kaplan took it under his wing and he's renovated it much further on. And
further than that.
It is wonderful. Thank you for that. I tell you, I'm getting such interesting information. I wish my talk had been shorter so I could hear much more of this, but I'm very much enjoying this bit.
By the way, there is a book in Shanghai. I can't remember, but I bought a copy. It's a coffee table book about the Jews of Shanghai by a Chinese fellow, a journalist.
Oh, a journalist. I thought it was Pan Guan who did that.
Pan Guan, yeah, but that's his name. Yeah, in 2000, I bought it. I don't have it here with me. It's in my Florida residence. But I have so many other books also in Shanghai written by the French.
Well then, Alan, I think you should have my book on the compilation, the one that's got all Helen Becho's given me her biography as well. I compiled about, altogether there are 23 biographies in there. And I wrote 3 of them, I think 4 of them, the Kaduris, Hardoon, and not Hardoon, Savictor Sassoon, and a few others. And you might find it interesting as well.
Where can I find it? Is it on Amazon?
It's called, wait, look, I might have a copy here. I recommend it because, first of all, it's got 500 pages. I'm selling my own book, I've never done this before. 500 pages and 50 photographs, because I was very, very lucky to have a publisher who thought that pictures were more important than writing. And even at the very end, when he was typesetting the book, I found pictures like a letter from the Queen to Sir Victor Sassoon congratulating him on one of his winnings. And
can I see the title again?
Yeah, it's called Shanghai Baghdadi Jews, a collection of biographical reflections.
Okay, I'll look for it on the internet.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed to recommend it, because also he kept the price really low, which surprised me. I think $22, which took the breath out of my sales, because my first book, which I'll show you as well, and I'm not even going to recommend it, it was really my doctoral thesis sort of vamped up, and they only put 10 pictures in it. And guess how much that cost? Well, about $38. And when I last looked on the internet, it was about 100, but that's a different story.
Please, Lynn, I have got to run. Can I just show something?
Yes, sure. Very quickly.
Okay. If anybody is interested, this is the 1939 directory of the Europeans who lived in Shanghai, it's almost all Jewish. These are, and someone has said that they were from, is it Carl or something? I don't know. Somebody who was there. Whatever the family name is, I'm happy, again, to look in here. It's a small directory.
Yeah.
You can see, inside what it is. It's addresses, it's names, it's everything.
That's
I'm happy to share. If anybody just emails me, and please, Lynn, you know how to, it's my family name, Rhode, spelled like Rhode Island, .harold@gmail.com. It's just me backwards, I am backwards.
Okay, lovely. Or if they forget your email address, there's always info@harif.org, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, excuse me, I'm sorry, I simply have got to leave.
Okay, no, I know a lot of people have to leave, so we'll come up to, I think, the last person who wants to.
No, I don't think we have anyone else.
Is it Karen? Karen?
No,
no.
Unmute.
Okay.
I just want to share a screen for a second. It's available on Amazon.
Yeah. Oh, well done, Lawrence. Shanghai's Baghdadi Jews, a collection of biographical reflections. I think that looks like an early.
Oh my goodness! If that's what they're selling it at, it's a bargain. But I don't know. I mean, believe me, it's a bargain.
Yeah, well worth buying.
Yeah, my goodness me, it takes my breath away.
I just bought a copy.
Yeah. Oh, he's just bought a copy. You see, there you go.
and even the other one they've. Oh, okay. Well, it's good time to shop. Might be because of the pandemic. I don't know. Gosh, you give me 4.5 stars. 4.5 stars, not bad.
Okay. So sorry, Yvonne Danielle. I'm calling on you now. Shall we unmute Yvonne?
Right. Sorry, I was just going. I've actually just bought a copy. There is, I think, one copy still left.
Is she unmuted?
Let me just go in there. Yvonne Danielle. Oh, hold on.
We're just unmuting you now.
Well, I've got one from Gilda that she's bought one. Thank you, Gilda. I know you'll enjoy it.
I am unmuted. Can somebody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You're on. Go ahead.
All right. I was also born in Shanghai, and Ellen and I met each other on the first reunion trip. I have been back to Shanghai 3 times with my husband, and I have been in the museum. I'm on a video in the museum, and I have been taken to the house that we lived in, but I was 2.5 years old when we came to America. So I had no firsthand memories, but Shanghai is now very close to me. I've stayed in touch with the museum there. And I don't know if you've all heard, but they are starting to demolish the area where the Jews lived, which was a ghetto, and it is being demolished, and who knows what's going to go there. But the museum, on the other hand, is expanding. It's become a very important thing for Shanghai for tourists. And I know many, many people who have gone there. And I feel like it's my museum. I have donated my birth certificate to them and so on. So just wanted to get that said. And hi, Ellen.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see my good friend Anne over there, Anne Corn. I think this is the 3rd time you've listened to this one, Anne. Glutton for Punishment.
You have a fan club. You have a fan club. Okay. So, Anne, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Just that my cousin Suad Shami married Aboud Hardoon, who's very much related, obviously. I don't know, I think it was from a brother of, because he was in Baghdad. I don't think they went to Shanghai. And he has brothers and sisters around the world. A lot of them ended up in Los Angeles, having been in Tehran. So they went from Baghdad to Tehran. They used to travel a lot, and they were so excited going to Shanghai and seeing all the Hardoon names everywhere. And if anyone does know my cousin Aboud, who died quite a while ago, who's a charming, charming person. So I've very much in touch with the Shanghai.
Uncle Aboud. and Auntie Saida.
Someone
Is
else
that the
has
same
recommended
one?
another book
Yeah.
called The Jews in Shanghai, which I
We
know
will
nothing about.
put that up
I'll
on
go, again, I'll do a
the chat.
screenshot, but that's a lot more expensive.
I have one last question for Maisie, and that is, I know Lisette mentioned that Renée Dangour was born in Shanghai and her sister Joyce. And now I remember Renée Dangour saying she was interned, I think, in a British prisoner of war camp. Would that be?
That's right. And Joyce has written a biography for my book, a very interesting one. Her father had a very high profile, and he was dealing with the Japanese at that time. Yes, and I used to go and have these very wonderful meetings with Naim Dangour. He was very kind, gave me a lot of advice.
Right.
And
so it's because her father had business dealings with the Japanese. That's why they were interned. Is that right?
Could you say, no. All the Baghdadi Jews who were British subjects were interned. That's the reason. Those that were Iraqis were free, but I mean, they had just as bad a time as the ones that were interned, I think.
Right, okay, well
In fact, the ones that weren't interned called themselves the left outs.
Okay. Well,
if anyone wants to speak, raise your hand
now,
or say it in the chat,
Yeah.
or I will close it all down.
Yes, I know. Last chance to say anything for anyone? No.
Well, I want to say something, Lynn. I want to give you a huge thank you for inviting me to share my presentation with all these wonderful people. I'm so happy to see you all and hopefully we'll meet again in better circumstances.
Well, it's my turn now to thank you, Maisie, for the most wonderful talk. And I'm sure we'll invite you back again to talk in greater detail about Salah Khadoun and Victor Sassoon. So
I'd be very pleased to. I'd really like to, in fact.
Sure you'll have a ready audience for that. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
I'm going to thank you because you told me so much that I didn't know, really.
I think we're just very lucky that we have all the right people on the call.
Absolutely. I think I've never had such remarkable feedback from one audience. Oh, Sarah Manassi, thank you, Sarah. Oh yeah, that's
and just to remind everyone, next week's lecture is actually on Monday at 8 o'clock. It's not our usual Tuesday, and it'll be about persecuted religious minorities in the Middle East. So that is a must. Please do join us for that. And it remains to me just to wish you all a very good evening or good afternoon. Be safe, be well, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I will now unmute everyone. If anyone wants to say hello or do whatever, everyone's about to be unmuted.
Still some people there.
Lynn.
Everyone. Hi, Toby.
Lynn, Carol Bassery, great job. Wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much from Dory in London.
Yeah, hi,
Thank
Dory.
you all.
Thank you, Lizette.
Hello.
Thank you from New Rochelle, New York.
Thank you.
Lovely talk from Kurtwick. Lovely talk.
Thank you, Maisie and Lynn.
Thank you. Thanks. Lovely to have you all.
Bye. You're doing a gigantic job. Bless you.
And I want to say thank you to Lawrence as well for all the technical stuff that he's been doing behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
Everyone needs a Lawrence to sort out.
Bunny in the background.
It's Ed here. I didn't catch the beginning of the session, but there's a new book called The Lost Kings of Shanghai, which is about.
Yeah.
Okay. Send me the. Do you have the link?
If anyone has links, if they send them to Lynn, we'll put them up. On the
I'll
Harif
put them
website.
up on the website or on the Facebook page.
And the recording of this will be online tomorrow.
Yeah, and I apologize that there isn't a Facebook live stream, but there will be a YouTube recording.
Great. Anyway, thank you, Len. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, and thanks for sharing your story there, Toby. That's wonderful.
Was very interesting.
Whoops.